it's July 22nd, and we find ourselves in Isaiah chapters 28 through 30. As Isaiah continues to tell Israel why the Assyrians will take them captive, as well as about Judah's future exile, he also lets them know that God's punishment will not last forever, and that the peace of the future millennium will be amazing. In chapter 28, Isaiah addresses Ephraim, another name for the northern 10 tribes of Israel, specifically their sinful lifestyle. At the close of their time in the Promised Land, this is pictured by excessive drunkenness. Now that will not be the case in the future, in the millennium, or in that day, when God himself rules his faithful people. But soon, God will use the Assyrians, a people of strange lips or of a foreign language, who are more understandable than Israel's own drunken priests, at teaching them about God's punishment for sin. In verses 14 to 22, Isaiah tells Judah not to think that they're exempt from God's discipline. Just because they're not going to be conquered by the Assyrians, their time is coming. But in verses 23 through 29, God reminds his people that discipline won't last forever. Just like the farmer doesn't continually plow his field, he plants it and harvests it properly. So too will God's discipline come to an end. Chapter 29 turns to the nation of Judah and their future exile at the hand of Babylon, who is not named here. While they may honor God with their words, their lives do not worship God. Isaiah used the illustration of a potter and clay. Did the clay make the potter, or is the clay smarter than the potter that sculpted it? Of course not. But that is what Judah and we are like when we think that we know how to live better than how our Creator made us to live. And in chapter 30, Judah would try to get help from Egypt instead of God, but Egypt would not come to help them. Verses 6 and 7 describe the difficult and dangerous trip to Egypt that would be for nothing. Now, of special note here, a dinosaur is mentioned in this passage. The flying, fiery serpent is most likely a pterodactyl or similar flying dinosaur. Dinosaurs are mentioned all throughout the Bible and lived much more recently than evolutionists would claim. Though the reigns of Hezekiah and Josiah would be good for Judah, eventually they would not want to hear from God's prophets or follow God's word, and the resulting sin would be their downfall. But Isaiah again looks to the future millennium in verses 18 to 26, when God, the teacher, would live among his people and teach them to live according to his word, and his people would no longer worship idols, and the world will be an amazing place to live. So what can we take away from today's passage? God patiently warns his people away from sin, and he lovingly disciplines us when we refuse to live righteously. But his punishment doesn't last forever, and the peace that he wants for us is far better than what our sin would ever result in. My prayer for us today is that we would heed God's warnings and turn from our sin, that we acknowledge that our Creator's ways are better, and look forward to the peace that he will bring in the very near future. If you haven't done so already, please download our Through the Bible reading plan at HesperiaCommunityChurch.org/throughthebible. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.